It's time for something else too. A concerted, all-out war on gangs and gang culture. This isn't some side issue. It is a major criminal disease that has infected streets and estates across our country. Stamping out these gangs should be a new national priority.
It's nothing but non-stop harassment. No matter where we are, no matter what we do, it follows us everywhere, unfortunately.
Once you label young people as gang members, once you label whole communities as gang-ridden zones, then everybody there is inherently criminal, and what you do to them, no one looks, no one cares.
So they're brutalising these young people. They've admitted and acknowledged breaking their human rights, just putting them on the list, and then they police them in this really particular way.
They don't even admit racial discrimination or institutional racism.
People have been convicted for murder for conduct that amounts to no more than being present at the scene.
And the police just started using the gang narrative in every single criminal case that they possibly could.
If people would believe and know that the system is created to work this way, that the second you're charged, you're fighting for your life.
They justify the violence used against black community members because of this gang label.
Who polices the police? Is it down for academics, lawyers, civil liberty organisations, grassroots organisations to do so?
Once a young person has been labelled as a gang member, it impacts every area of their life.
If we don't support them, it's going to get worse, because they're just going to be angry, damaged, traumatised and brutalised.
There is a power in this label of gang, and it's the power to dehumanise.
The gang policing, as I understand it, really begins with Cameron and Boris Johnson, and it begins after the summer riots or the English riots or the uprisings that we saw in 2011 following the police shooting and killing, the police murder of Mark Duggan on the streets in Tottenham.
But in truth, age-old tensions between sections of this community and the police are still a significant issue. All that was needed was a spark to ignite that anger. It came last Thursday night when police shot dead a local man. And now even community leaders, while condemning Saturday night's violence, point to the continuing unanswered questions about that fatal shooting as a catalyst for the disorder.
What we see behind us is very painful. The heart of our community has been ripped out. The people that came here, peaceful protesters saying, give us answers for what has happened 2 days ago. They didn't get those answers.
It is all too clear that we have a big problem with gangs in our country. For too long, there's been a lack of focus on the complete lack of respect shown by these groups of thugs. I'm clear that they are in no way representative of the vast majority of young people in our country who despise them, frankly, as much as the rest of us do. But there are pockets of our society that are not just broken, but frankly sick.
Gangs became the scapegoat for the so-called English riots, despite the fact that there was very loose connection that could be found between so-called gangs and what actually unfolded.
The gangs narrative was something that Boris Johnson and Cameron created when they were forced back from their holidays in 2011, and it was their justification or explanation to the nation as to why young people were out there committing those acts that we saw in that time. And that's when the narrative begins, because they need to now explain why it is that young people are rising up across the country. Why are white kids rising up in Salford whilst black kids are rising up in Tottenham? So they had to come up with something that kind of was an explanation, and this notion of gangs organising or orchestrating those riots was the explanation.
The consequence of it had so much sustainability in how the black community in particular has been policed for more than a decade following on from this. I don't think people realised how potent it was for the Prime Minister to essentially announce because of racism and the dog whistle that is gang, that he intended to have his government wage a war on black youth and black culture and the black community.
For me, the root cause of this mindless selfishness is the same thing that I have spoken about for years. It is a complete lack of responsibility in parts of our society. People allowed to feel that the world owes them something, that their rights outweigh their responsibilities, and that their actions do not have consequences.
That notion of the gang therefore being racialised is that it's used as a way of legitimising and justifying the police encroachment into black and brown communities, and as a way of presenting the wider problems in society as a cause and responsibility of black communities.
Before there was Trident Gang Command, there was Trident Gun Command, which was a specific Met task force that was established to deal with so-called gun crime in the black community specifically. And why this is interesting is because following on from the uprisings in 2011, when Trident Gun Command was disbanded, the next day, Trident Gang Command was established.
The Met Commissioner is launching a crackdown on the thousands of gang members here in London. Bernard Hogan-Howe wants to ensure the violent criminal hardcore is behind bars. He's scrapped Operation Trident to create a new team that will target groups of youths in crime hotspots and use divide and rule tactics to stop them in their tracks.
The tactics might be familiar, but Operation Trident has been given a makeover. Scotland Yard's long-running initiative to tackle gun crime in London's black community has a new mission. Now it'll target the growing menace of criminal gangs. Trident's relaunch was backed up by early morning raids, leading to more than 200 arrests.
What we're doing is we're concentrating on the high-priority offenders, those gang members we know are causing an awful lot of crime. And if we are ruthless in the way that we go out and find them, lock them up, or divert them if we can, but the important thing is to stop them hurting people.
Operation Trident was launched in 1998 to tackle gun violence by so-called yardie gangs. Later, it focused exclusively on crimes referred to by the shorthand black-on-black killings. Its new brief will see a doubling in the number of officers to 1,000.
Trident is about gun crime, and what they're doing is expanding that group, greatly increasing the numbers in order to take account of gang crime in a more concerted way. And I think that's the right way to go.
The new look Trident will get an extra £60 million a year.
This task force one day had the exact remit of policing the black community specifically. That was the remit. To the next day being told the same officers, the same exact, everything in the task force has remained the same. The name has changed, and they've said the focus is now gangs. It's got nothing to do with race. That's what they said. Gangs had nothing to do with race. But these are the same people that for all this time have just been investigating black people and black communities specifically.
Well, Assistant Commissioner Mark Rowley is the Met's head of specialist policing and joins us now. Now, your Commissioner, Bernard Hogan-Howe, has said that this new unit marks a step change in the way that gang crime is tackled. So basically, you're saying our gang is bigger than yours.
Whilst we've been working on gang crime in a range of different units across London, we haven't had this many dedicated to it before. So we've been dealing with it perhaps on, in hindsight, too much of a piecemeal approach. So having over 1,000 dedicated towards it, but that's just the heart of the solution. I mean, today we've had 1,300 officers working on the operations we've run today. So it's over 1,000 dedicated to it, but really coordinating the whole Met in an effort against gang crime.
You're saying you're reprioritising. So essentially, the new Trident unit is a morphing of the old, rather successful one, I might say. Does that mean that there is no longer the need to deal with black-on-black crime? Is that problem totally solved now?
Absolutely not. Where we are is the existing effort against gun crime in black communities and in other communities will continue as part of this new operation. We're not taking anything at all away from that.
And it's really important to note that what the government did was, in the immediate aftermath of the summer riots, that's what they called them, the English riots of 2011, they did some cross-party work. And they came up with a policy ending youth and gang violence. They brought that out across the system and they shared it with the rest of the public sector. The 2008 PCA bill has started to encourage the sharing of information across the sectors. And the police have been given an opportunity now to share information almost unchallenged. And this is how they bring their particular genre, their particular type of institutional racism, and they bring it across the whole entire system. Because now they've infected the whole system, and they've got the whole system looking for gangsters.
For a long period of time, the majority of funding that was coming out for youth, just for good old-fashioned youth work, to access that money, you had to label the work you were doing as about gangs. The young people were gang members, or they had to be at risk of being gang members. Everything was through that lens of gangs.
It was at the same time that we was having austerity, so they just cut the youth service, youth provision. They created these gang youth workers. Everything became gang orientated.
It forced a lot of organisations to say, yes, we work with gangs. We have a lot of young people who are in gangs. Give us the money so we can carry on to do the great work that we were doing in the community, because there's so many funding cuts to youth services.
In Haringey and places like this, youth workers that I used to have real respect for were part of bringing this on board.
I think it's really problematic because then essentially youth organisations and community organisations are becoming complicit in this criminalisation, but they're being coerced to do that out of the lack of resource and the genuine divestment that we've seen in the sector.
In a time when there is austerity and the government is actually saying to you, there's money for the gangs, there's no money for nothing else, but we have money and expertise to help you with the gangs. And when you become better at identifying your gang problem, we'll give you money to solve it.
Forefront didn't want any money that would require us to label young people in that way or label the work we do in that way, because we understood the danger of labeling our community like that. But that was a political choice that we had to make, and it did mean that, you know, there was a lot of resource that we weren't able to access. But I think other organisations, you know, they did take that path, and there's a consequence that came with that, because then we're reinforcing this so-called issue to say now there's thousands and thousands of gang members, and every young person is at risk of gangs.
So in the Ending Gang and Youth Violence policy, when that went out, they then wrote to all the regions. They had 33 priority areas, urban areas that they wrote to. They said, tell us about your gang problem. When they wrote back and said, we don't have a gang problem, they said, you have a problem in identifying your gang problem. So here, we'll send these people to help you. And all of a sudden, everyone had a gang problem. The DWP, Department for Work and Pensions, what skills can they possibly have for identifying gang members? In 2016, Dr. Patrick Williams and Becky Clark brought out a report, Dangerous Associations. They identified that in the preceding year, the DWP identified more gangsters than the police themselves did.
It's a weapon of oppression, it's a weapon of racism, it's a weapon of discrimination. They are accountable to nobody, it's not tested, it's not tried, it's not accessible. You don't have to be accountable. In any democratic system, you have to be accountable. So if you don't have to be accountable, what are you?
The first report that I was in charge of overseeing was Being Matrix, the over-policing of gang suspects in London. And that research really opened my eyes to the horrific nature of gang policing, use of surveillance, use of intelligence, the clandestine, covert nature of what was happening, and it gave a voice to people being affected.
The label gangs has a negative impact on anyone that's from the community, or if you want to call it the hood. What I would like people to know about gang policing and the gangs matrix is that it's a tool that's being weaponized, and it's just based on prejudice, especially towards, I'd say, people of a certain racial demographic and social economic status. If you see a group of people within the community, they'd say, oh, that's a gang right there. But we could just be talking about positive things like what work we done today, or like could be talking about what happened after school. There's no age label as well for the gang. They can say, you can see a bunch of 13-year-olds chilling around and the police could still suspect, say, oh, that could be a gang right there. Could be a 30-year-old still say the same thing, that's a gang. As soon as they see an area of poverty and a group of young boys hanging around the area of poverty, they'd believe that straight away, then that's a gang.
Once a young person has been labelled as a gang member, it impacts every area of their life. It impacts their health, it impacts their education, employment opportunities, whether they can drive or not, whether they can open a bank account. It's really far-reaching, and it's not just those people as individuals, it's their families too.
It can really harm their lives in so many different aspects, like can't get a job, can't get housing, police harassment.
My name being on the system, especially not just my name, but I'm saying when people's name are on the system, makes them less able to do things. So traveling could be one. They wouldn't be able to travel. Jobs, they wouldn't be able to get accepted to jobs.
It's crazy to know that the police can have such a huge effect on your everyday life, even if you're not really a criminal. It's unfair, especially when you haven't done anything to warrant that label. It's just what someone has perceived you to be. Like, that's quite unfair, and it's like very detrimental to like everyday life.
I'm just, what's the word, limited to a certain amount of places. I can't really go this place, I can't go that place. On top of that, I can't fly out. So it's just like, they just won't let me live my life.
When it was explained to me thoroughly, the gang matrix was explained to me thoroughly, I believe that me being a victim of a crime could have possibly put me on there. When the crime first happened to me, I was questioned as if I was a suspect rather than the victim. So it was a thing where I was confused as to why I'm being questioned and why they keep on coming back to me, questioning me even more, as if I'm the one that's caused harm. I heard that if I was a victim of a crime, there's a possibility that they'd keep me on there just to keep some sort of tabs on me.
It's been nothing but headache. Like, they stop me all the time. They've got markers on my vehicle. Only God knows what it says about me due to what I've been arrested for prior, even though I've been innocent for majority of things. So yeah, it's just one big headache, if I'm being honest. So yeah, eventually I thought, yeah, maybe I'm on this matrix, the way the police are onto me, but that's the thing, I didn't see any proof if I was on there. You know what I'm saying? It's a bit mad.
It's very hard to find out if you're on it. Like, I heard people have done subject access requests and then got the information back 2 years later. A lot can happen in 2 years.
I feel like the gang label has impacted me in my everyday life just by, like, sometimes I'll just be chilling and the police want to come search me, they want to come check me, even though I'm just minding my own business.
When I was about 14, I got a letter saying that my school had suspected me of being involved in gang activity, and then I had police officers coming into my school and stuff like that. I'd never been arrested, nothing, no criminal history. I was kind of a bit paranoid because, like, they know who I am already. I've not really done anything. And then when I'm walking around, I've even been arrested in my school uniform for like nothing, like just being present in the area and being arrested in my school uniform, like 5 minutes after coming out of school, just because they know who I am.
We've seen entire families threatened with eviction because of so-called police intelligence around gangs. We've seen young people being banned or blocked from attending college. We've seen, again, young people not able to open any bank account, being refused the ability to drive.
The DVLA are dead in the water because they responded to police officers, wrote to the DVLA about hundreds, if not thousands of young black boys, and the DVLA on the word, and if you ever see it, it's a paragraph. It's a paragraph, not even proper sworn statement, and on their word, they've taken away these people's driving license.
I was sent a letter to my house saying I wasn't allowed to be in that specific area, so where I live in, because of suspicion of lawyering, like standing around in the area making trouble, and I was kind of like confused on why they sent it to me. It wasn't really the police, it was Barnet has sent me this letter. So I was confused because they said they had photographic evidence of me in that area. It wasn't me in the area, and they've not just me have been banned, but multiple of my other friends have been sent this letter saying I was banned from this area and the area that I live in, saying I can't like leave my house. I was like, how would I get to school? You get me? Like, I have to be, for me to leave my house, I have to live with my parents. And the gang label that the gang matrix has put upon me, it's affected my life because at a point I was homeless for a bit, and usually, 'cause I was underage as well, when a child reports themselves as homeless, they're meant to get housed the same day, but I didn't get housed for about 7 months. Spoke about it to Forefront, and they've obviously advocated for me. I found out it's because of me being on the gang's matrix and being attached to gangs and criminality and stuff like that, for things I hadn't been convicted for. They didn't want me to mix with other children. So because of that, I've just left to be outside. No one really checked where I was or asked where I was. And I was, like I said, I was underage at the time. So it's like, if that can happen to me, that can happen to anyone. And I hadn't been convicted or anything. So there's nothing to actually prove gang activity or anything like that. It was just someone's suspicion.
I remember one time when I was young, I was on my way home and a bully van just jumped out on me. They pulled up in front of me, they just jumped out on me. Said they're looking for knives. They searched me, and then it really made me upset because I felt like I was embarrassed in front of everybody, especially in my own estate where everyone can just look out their window, see what's going on. I know I wasn't doing nothing I shouldn't be, so it felt like it was an embarrassment for myself because it made me look bad in front of my whole estate, basically.
It's affected everyone's life in different ways. I know some people that just moved out of the way because they can't take this no more.
The whole gangs matrix, gangs policing, like, it's impacted my life a lot because it's like I leave my house with a fear of like, forget anything else. It's like, whatever I do today, I can have a crazy altercation with police just because they know my face. Like, I've gone to the shops, I'm being chased by undercover police on pedal bikes. For what reason, I don't know. You feel me? Like I said, I've come out of school, I've been arrested before. For what reason, I don't know. And it's that constant fear of anything can happen.
It's affected me, but I don't really let it get the best of me. Before I used to let it get the best of me. Now I just kind of open arms. It is what it is. Accept it.
How do you
like relinquish the gang label? How do you do that? I want a lot of transparency. And it's like, if this is something that's going to affect my life, why am I not educated on what it can do? So I think it just needs to be scrapped.
For people that know, it's like a never-ending thing as well. It's like, they just forever labeled as this. Even if they're trying to change and do whatever, they're always in there. Because they labeled as this, they done one thing.
It's a dirty tactic, it's corrupt, if I'm being honest. Because someone was actually trying to change our lives and work, but because of past things and labels that they've given us, it's not about non-stop harassment. No matter where we are, no matter what we do, it follows us everywhere, unfortunately.
This is a unjust system, unjust tool, it's not fair, and it's been weaponized by multiple agencies to target my community. And some days I'll just be going crazy. Just like, why me of all people? So I do say it does play up on me, but what more can I do? these people are the law.
A range of criteria that only apply to these people who are labelled as gang that don't apply to everybody else. So in that way, essentially, the gang label is creating a separate legal code. And because of the way that it's so racialized, it's not that you're being treated differently under the law because you're black. It's because you're a gang member. So they can get away with really obvious racial discrimination, legal racial discrimination, but just use the gang as an escape for that.
The legal community has a lot more to do, in my opinion, around challenging the gang's narrative and the matrix use in cases from start to finish. I can't say how much solicitors in London and around the country do step up and really fight, but my impression is that it's quite a small group of people who understand what's going on.
I think people would be surprised to know how little real evidence is required to convict some of these young people, and that's the power of this gang label.
Over time, the prosecution and the police just started using the gang narrative in every single criminal case that they possibly could, even where there wasn't necessarily an overall narrative regarding gangs to do with the offence itself.
This evidence, this gang evidence that's presented in these trials is often rooted in racist police intelligence. So that's where it begins. So the evidence that ends up before the prosecution cannot be detached from police intelligence that we know is discriminatory.
Social media, lyrics in so-called drill music, photos, other kinds of videos, cell site, different kinds of communication, signage, so-called gang signs or other things, clothing or area stuff that would apparently associate somebody, mean someone's associated with a gang.
If you try and persuade people that innocent people who've never committed a criminal offence in the UK are languishing in prison, they're like, nah, that doesn't happen.
So the biggest problem with the gang label for me is how it translates into life sentences, overwhelmingly for young black men who are convicted of murders that they didn't carry out under a legal principle which is commonly referred to as joint enterprise.
Within the context of joint enterprise, in terms of some research that I was involved with alongside my colleague Becky Clark, what we found was how central the gang narrative was for securing the collective punishments of groups of young black and brown people within the community.
The law states that if you intentionally assist or encourage an offence, you can be held liable in the same way as the person who carries it out. But the problem with the law is that it doesn't properly define what constitutes assistance and encouragement. So that's left open to huge interpretation, meaning that people have been convicted for murder for conduct that amounts to no more than being present at the scene or a series of phone calls with the person who carried out the crime, perhaps before or after the offence.
As a consequence of that label, and as a consequence of that determination by the police, essentially the behaviours of one individual can be presented as the behaviour of the gang. Within joint enterprise cases, therefore, collective forms of punishment, that gang label becomes critical for ensuring that we can convict more and more and larger groups of racially minoritized and specifically black children within our communities.
We've seen the increasing trend of, music videos, for example, being used as evidence in court. And there was one interesting case in Manchester where a music project that was actually funded by the local council, the videos that came from that project were actually used by the prosecution in a joint enterprise case, which ended up in several young people being sent to prison for a murder they didn't do because of being in a so-called gang. And the evidence that these young people were in the gang was this music video that was funded by the council.
Lawyers need to be really live to the pushing of the gang narrative in a case, They need to challenge the so-called police experts that the CPS bring out time and time again around what is a gang, what gang lyrics are, what gang so-called signage is, what drill lyrics mean. They wheel out these people who claim that they've got an expertise in language and lyrics, and a lot of solicitors, I don't think, challenge it.
This default assumption that young black men are gang members, and therefore there was a presumption that they were complicit in each other's actions. It's almost like it's become an automatic thing. If there's a case where somebody dies and there's multiple people in the vicinity and they're black, it's assumed that it's a gang case, and it's really difficult for lawyers to see conflict that involves young black people outside of the lens of gang.
Where I'm from, we've had cases where 10 children have been jointly convicted for over 160 years. We have another group of 11 young people who again were convicted, where one individual was responsible for the harm that was perpetrated.
My question in doing my research became, so how does the prosecution convince a jury that a person who either wasn't present at the scene or was present but didn't participate in the conduct at all has intentionally assisted or encouraged, or intended to assist or encourage the offence? And that's where the gang narrative and gang evidence becomes particularly significant.
So what we found was many individuals spoke about not being present at the scene, individuals who were unaware of what was going to take place, individuals who were completely unconnected, who find themselves ensnared in the net of joint enterprise, many of whom are now serving lengthy custodial sentences for offences that they did not commit.
And if you get charged, then it's really serious. That to me is the beginning of the end. And you should fight for your life from that point. And I tell every young person and every family, fight for your life now, because you're now caught in the web.
It implies a common knowledge between the defendants. So because you are said to be in a gang that has this criminal purpose, so-called criminal purpose, you must be aware that this person had a weapon. You must have been aware that they had a problem with this person, and therefore, if they see them, they're intent on violence.
We no longer therefore need to think about culpability or who was responsible for the harm. We're not even interested in what behaviours we're engaged with.
Commonly reported to me from the young men who I've been to see is that the language of must have known was used by the prosecution repeatedly in their trial with respect to you must have known about the weapon, and being able to draw an inference from the fact that they are purportedly a gang makes that argument even stronger.
You try and speak to families and say, this is coming now. He or she is charged. This is coming. And they're like, oh no, my boy's innocent. And I've spoken to lots of different groups. I don't know how to get by that. I'm not able to get by that. I'm failing completely to get by it. As a lawyer, I cannot make people, families, young people, believe me when I tell them, you'll be found guilty. No, but I didn't do it. Doesn't matter. So what's going to come next is you're going to be labelled as a gang member, but I'm not a gang member. And then you can ask, well, what is a gang member then if you know you're not one? No, but I'm not in a gang. What's a gang? And they don't know, and they don't know the damage that's created because of the stereotype, notional stereotype. So yeah, young people, I'm surprised if they don't get convicted now, because I'm just not seeing it happen.
The young man, I'll refer to him as Ryan for anonymity reasons, who I went to visit, and at his trial, he was also convicted of murder as a secondary party, so he didn't carry out the murder. And he had evidence presented at his trial of, it was cell site data, which indicates the vicinity of where your phone has been. And the cell site data showed that he had spent lots of time on a particular housing estate, so he frequently visited this housing estate, and he lived next door to it, and his friends lived there. Now, this evidence was adduced at trial, and the prosecution narrative to accompany it was that this shows that he's gang affiliated because that housing estate was identified by the police as a gang hotspot. Now, so just by merely existing in his day-to-day life, he now has evidence, or so-called evidence, that he's gang affiliated, merely because the police have decided that where he spends his time is a gang hotspot. Young black men are disadvantaged by default when they are indicted as a secondary party to murder, because gang intelligence or gang evidence is more likely to exist for them when they arrive in the dock because of how they're policed. So we already know that black communities, or communities that are overwhelmingly black, are more likely to be labelled as gang hotspots by the police. So merely by existing and spending time in one of those communities, you're more likely to encounter the police, with every contact with the police leaving a trace behind. And therefore, young black men who are stopped and searched at a rate that's however many times young white men are more likely to enter the courtroom with all this data and information about them that the police can then use, or the prosecution can then use.
Another really difficult and more painful aspect of joint enterprise and joint enterprise convictions and cases is that often the young person who has been harmed, the young person who's been subjected to violence, are rarely offered that victim status. They also, therefore, because of the gang label, become presented as gang members themselves, and therefore are presented by the police and also by prosecution teams as being deserving of what they experience and the harm they've experienced. And that has to be for me, one of the most tragic components of the gang label, particularly within the context of joint enterprise cases, is that individuals and the police can therefore absolve themselves of responsibility. The state absolves itself of responsibility by simply presenting the young person who was killed as a gang member. Therefore means they are also undeserving and therefore are not afforded that victim's status.
When they're brought into court, touch wood, we haven't failed yet. When we test these things and we make them explain what it is that they mean when they talk about gangs and this, we haven't failed. Not in mine. In the criminal context, then it's another story, because they've created a whole monster in there. The language is now normal language. The gang rhetoric is normal. It rafts in on the back of, they've spent years creating a notion, and now it's real and destroying lives as it goes.
In 2021, I had founded UNJUST and had been going on for about a year in 2022 when I was approached by Liberty to say that they had a claimant who believed he was on the Matrix. His name is Awate Salaman. Shout out to Awate, because without Awate, there would not have been a legal case against the Metropolitan Police. And I was invited as UNJUST to participate in the case as a co-claimant, because we have a public interest in cases where there's racial discrimination within policing or the criminal legal system.
Every time these forms of so-called intelligence are tested in any legitimate arena, they're found to be unlawful. When the ICO has tested them, they were found to be unlawful and unworkable. When the IOPC tested them, they were found to be unlawful.
We were able to argue that we believed that it was racially discriminatory and also breaching people's family life and human and rights to privacy and data rights. The Met Police, 2-3 days before we were meant to go to court, settled the case, which, yes, was fantastic in terms of progression. However, they did not concede that the Matrix had been racially discriminatory. They only conceded that it had breached people's human rights in terms of family life and data.
We've exposed the Matrix, right? We've forced them to take thousands of black kids' names off of that database. That's amazing what we've done. And we mustn't underestimate what we've done. Why we don't celebrate is because we know they're going to come back with something else. But we've done a lot.
So for the last 5 years, what I saw was MOPAC essentially protect the Met. Yes, there were some reviews done into the use of the Matrix, but it amazes me that none of those found there to be anything unlawful. But yet, we about to go to court, and 2 days before the Met admit that it's unlawful. So they weren't admitting it in the meeting, and MOPAC were saying it wasn't in the meeting, but we get to the court gates, and now you're admitting it was. Since we've had the settlement, There has been no public information put out about how you hold the Metropolitan Police to account if your information was breached via the gangs matrix, and I think that is a crying shame, because there was an opportunity for Mopac, Sadiq Khan, Deputy Mayor Sophie Linden to hold the Met to account and say that if we want to build trust and confidence in the community, then this is an avenue to do so and to apologise for the harm that had been caused. No institution has done that.
What we can do is start to stand up, take responsibility and be a community again, and do whatever it is we can to support those of them that will accept that support and try to help them to heal. But also, more importantly, let's help them to hold the state to account.
There's a lot that we can do in our community to support people who've been impacted by violence, to reduce violence, to de-escalate conflicts, to mediate conflicts, and really support people who have been harmed, because a lot of the prevention of further violence comes from having adequate aftercare for people who have been impacted, and we just need more investment in that type of work and support. So I don't think this type of surveillance is the answer. And if it was successful, we would see the success. We would see this reduction in violence. We would see change in that way. And after more than a decade of this type of policing, what does the data show? I don't like to reduce it to that, because we can see there's so many other ways to show that it hasn't been successful. But what did their own data show about their success in using such a tool? I think it speaks for itself to say it's failing in every way if its purpose was actually to address violence in the community.
The Metropolitan Police have said that they will be dismantling it. However, I don't believe that that will be the end of use of databases around serious violent crime or surveilling black men. I think that they probably have another database running, and that people will just be transported to that database. We should all be on notice for how surveillance technology is going to continue morphing. Racism doesn't die, it just morphs.
What we can do is support our young people when we know that the services are not meeting their needs. What we can do is create a different narrative. Go out and actually listen to the young people, try to work with them, try to create a sense of unity and community again.
So for people in London who believe, think, know that they were on the matrix, they should be getting in contact with legal solicitors, or they could come to UNJUST and we can support them with submitting a subject access request to the Metropolitan Police.
To build on what we've done, we just need some of the man them now to come forward with our support and with our protection to stand up and hold the state to account.
There's professionals here, there's families, and there's people impacted to know that the state doesn't let things go. The state morphs, and we have to be on high alert for what new breaches of our rights look like.
We know more broadly that the answer to violence is not in policing at all. We know that the answer to how we actually address violence in our community is being able to support people with healing. It's about repair. It's about genuine accountability. And unfortunately, what our system, the criminal legal system in this country offers, doesn't really look anything like accountability. And the police, even as we can see in the kind of harms that they inflict through this type of surveillance, they're not held accountable for their crimes.